Well, good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. If you're watching this with a strong coffee in one hand and your phone in the other, congratulations. You survived 2025 with your sanity mostly intact. Now, yesterday, we did the biggest breakups. The King, the Bourbon, Gretzky, Polyev, and the Neighbor from Hell. It was basically Canada's "we're done being your doormat" year in review.
So now that 2025 is a distant memory, this morning we're talking about what we can look forward to in 2026, who to keep an eye out for, and who to celebrate during the year ahead. The people and the ideas that came out ahead and are still pushing forward. The ones that are still demanding accountability, still refusing to hand the world over to a handful of rich guys with ego problems, and made it worth doing more than yelling at the headlines and doom-strolling yourself to sleep.
So, if yesterday was about who needed to go, this one is about who we're taking with us into the new year. So let's get into it.
Let's start with the people who flat out refused to disappear. The ones who were supposed to get tired, supposed to give up, supposed to decide, you know what? I'll just watch home renovation videos and pretend politics doesn't affect me anymore.
The survivors, the journalists, lawyers, whistleblowers, grassroots organizers, independent creators, people who didn't have the money or the power, but they had the screenshots, the timelines, and the patience to stick with the story.
And every time someone in power tried to bury something, these people popped up again and again and were like, "Hi, we're still here. We're still asking the same question you've been dodging for 6 months."
If 2024 was about shock, 2025 was about endurance. It wasn't glamorous. It was people showing up to court dates, filing access to information requests, digging through documents, fact-checking clips, pushing back on lies, and refusing to let the news cycle wipe the slate clean.
And here's the thing. The pressure to move on is only going to get stronger in 2026. You're going to hear things like, "Why are you still talking about that? That's old news. Listen, we need to move on."
No, we need accountability. And the people to watch this year are the ones who keep going anyway. They're not going to trend every single week. They're not flashy. But they are the reason that we still know what's actually happening behind the speeches. Thanks to those truth tellers, the institutions and billionaires don't fully control the story anymore. And in a year this dark, that is a real win.
If you want something simple to hold on to for 2026, the people's voices didn't get weaker last year. They got smarter. They connected with each other, and they're building structures that are much harder to knock down.
And speaking of getting smarter, let's talk about Canada finally acting like we have options. For most of our lives, we've been fed this lazy little story that Canada depends on the US. Don't ask questions, just smile and accept whatever deal we get.
And then Trump walks back into the Oval Office, grabs the tariff machine like it's a toy, and starts firing at anything that moves. Auto, steel, agriculture, whatever will get him an applause at a rally.
Suddenly, that old story didn't feel like a good relationship anymore. Trump did Canada a huge favor and made us open our eyes. If your entire economy is tied to one country and that country is being run like an unstable group project, you don't have a partnership. You have an abusive relationship.
Here's where Canada quietly scored huge in 2025. We started leaning into the word that we've always loved to say, but rarely backed it up with actual action. Diversification.
Now, not as a line in a press conference, but as a habit. Companies started looking at Europe and Asia with more urgency. Our resources stopped being framed as, how do we feed the US machine, and more as, who else actually wants to work with us on fair terms.
You saw it in the way trade ministers talked about new partners. You saw it in investments that didn't point south. You saw it in conversations around critical minerals, aerospace, clean energy, AI, all the stuff that actually shapes the next 30 years.
The win here isn't just we signed a deal or we shook a hand. The win is that every time we lock in a new market, it's one more layer of insulation for Canadian workers the next time Trump wakes up in the middle of the night in a bad mood.
So who should you watch in 2026? Watch the premiers who stopped treating the U.S. border like the edge of a map. BC is finally shipping LNG straight to Asia. Alberta's in early talks with Japanese refiners about joint ventures. Ontario and Manitoba signed trade deals with each other, and BC.
And on the Atlantic side, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick have been busy passing laws and signing deals to knock down their own barriers. And then there's Danielle Smith, who spent half of the year flirting with referendums, ended it standing next to Mark Carney signing an MOU to get Alberta's resources to the Pacific and out to Asia, instead of begging for space in the US system.
Tied to that is another group of winners, Canadians who remembered that we actually have leverage. We're so used to thinking of ourselves as the polite neighbor that we forgot that we have power. Real power. Quiet power, but it counts.
And you saw it in travel this year. You saw it in spending. You saw it when Canadians looked at the border and the rhetoric and said, you know what? I'm not going this year.
For decades, it was automatic. Winter comes, snowbird heads south, families go to Florida, couples hit Las Vegas, and shopping weekends are booked across the line. It was ritual.
But in 2025, with all that 51st state threats, new rules, security crackdowns, and this constant message from Trump's circle that Canadians are freeloaders and we should just be grateful for every crumb, Canadians quietly started changing their choices. Suddenly, there's more trips to Mexico, more to Europe, more staying in Canada and putting that money into our own communities. Canada had a record-breaking summer in tourism and is on track for record levels overall. Meanwhile, the US is the only one of 184 countries where international visitor spending is actually projected to fall in 2026.
And that bourbon story we told yesterday is another perfect example of people who stopped buying, not to show off online, but because they were genuinely disgusted. And then suddenly the people selling that same product, all of a sudden they rediscovered their concern for cross-border friendship.
Funny how that works, eh? When we're the ones getting hit, it's just business. But when they feel the sting, it's what about our friendship? Well, we got the memo. You come for us, we push back. The will of Canadian consumers is stronger than any talking point, and we proved it. Companies ignored press conferences, they ignored polite statements, but they couldn't ignore a sales chart pointing straight down.
And that's the leverage. We proved that when a lot of individual decisions stack up, they actually make a difference.
And if you're sitting there thinking, well, that's easy for you two to say, trust us, 2025 hit us hard as well. For 20 years, we built a little corner of the internet helping people plan trips. We wrote, we filmed, we edited, we built an audience the slow way. Then, the rules changed.
Our cheerful little travel blog watched search traffic drop while AI boxes started answering people's questions with our work and every other travel blogger's work.
The same platforms that used to send people to our site started keeping the traffic and the ad money for themselves. The click, it just never came.
And it wasn't just us. Blogs, local newsrooms, small creators, anyone who wasn't sitting on a monopoly watched their numbers sink while the platforms, they shrugged and said, it's just the market. It's just business.
So if 2025 felt like it stole something from you, well, same for us. We're in that pile with you. And that's why we keep coming back to the leverage. Because when everything from AI to tariffs is tilted towards the biggest players, the only thing regular people have left is what we do together, where we support travel, who we support, what we click on, and who we vote for.
So who to watch in 2026 are Canadian consumers. Not in the cheesy buy this and save the world kind of way, I wish that would happen, but in the very real sense that where you spend your money and who you give your attention to decides who survives in this mess.
When Canadians pick airlines, destinations, streaming platforms, apps, and products that aren't bankrolling people who treat our country like a vassal state, it's not just shopping. That's a signal.
And on the other side, watch the businesses that read the room correctly. The ones that say, okay, Canadians care about sovereignty, fairness, and basic respect. So let's align with that, not with whoever shouts the loudest in Washington or Ottawa.
Now, we have to talk about competence as well, because 2025 was the year competence quietly beat chaos. Enter Mark Carney, the man who looks at a crisis, pulls out a spreadsheet and goes, all right, let's actually solve this.
Yeah, while Trump was on stage turning tariffs, chaos, and the rule of law into a stand-up comedy routine, and Poilievre was busy recording yet another video about how everything is broken, Carney was doing the boring work that actually keeps a country functional.
And here's the contrast that mattered. On one side, you've got rage, slogans, permanent campaign mode, and an obvious contempt for the institutions that they're supposed to lead. And on the other side, someone who understands global finance, central banks, trade deals, and the ways supply chains actually work.
Canadians looked at that choice and after everything we've been through decided that we're done gambling. We chose the person who could walk into a room full of world leaders and not embarrass us, not roll over, and not set everything on fire for a soundbite.
Prime Minister Carney commands attention and respect. That was a huge win for Canada, not only on the international stage, but at home. He and his cabinet are fighting for all of us, in trade, investment, and in a we would like our pension and our job and our healthcare to still exist in 10 years way.
So who should you watch in 2026? Well, watch Prime Minister Carney and see what he does with that mandate. Watch how seriously this government takes trade diversification, defenses against illegal tariffs, and protection for workers. Because he said it himself, I'm not here for a long time. I'm not here to become a career politician. Prime Minister Carney is here to get the job done.
And then watch which industries get attention beyond election headlines. Is it all short-term sugar hits, or are we actually building things that will still matter when the next crisis hits?
And yes, watch the opposition too, because if their entire strategy is to trash the country every day and hope that people get so miserable that they start voting out of spite, they're going to keep running into a wall of Canadians who are tired, but we're not stupid.
The last big group of winners might be the actually most important in 2025. The voters who refuse to import another country's meltdown. Listen, 2025 was hard. Housing is still a mess, groceries hurt, people are exhausted. All the ingredients were there for somebody to come along and say, burn it all down and I'll fix it.
And a lot of us looked at what's happening south of the border and said, no way, absolutely not. We have problems, but we are not turning into that mess. That took more discipline than anybody's giving Canadians credit for, because it's easy to give in to despair. It's easy to decide the whole system is rigged and nothing else matters.
But people still lined up. They still volunteered, they still knocked on doors, made calls, shared information, debated with their families, and cast ballots.
And they did it while being bombarded with lies from U.S. networks, Canadian copycats, and accounts trying to convince us that Canada is useless, weak, and doomed unless we hand power to people who clearly don't like us very much.
And voters looked at that and said, actually, no, we're good. We'll take the boring, competent option that still believes in a public healthcare system and a functioning democracy. Now that's a win, and a massive one.
So who do you watch here in 2026? Well, watch the organizers, watch the volunteers, watch the people registering new voters, supporting local candidates who believe in democracy, fighting disinformation, and making sure this energy doesn't fade now that the first big hurdle is over.
The people who understand that an election is not a finish line, it's a checkpoint. And everything that made 2025 survivable, the trade moves, the resistance to tariffs, the accountability pushes, only holds if people stay engaged. The winners of 2025 weren't perfect heroes. They were people who just refused to quit. Truth tellers who kept digging, trade and policy people who treated diversification like an emergency, not a buzzword, Canadians who used their travel plans and their spending to send a message, and a government that chose competence over chaos, as well as voters who drew a hard line and said, we're not going down that road.
And you, of course, you watched us, you supported us, and you shared. And if you're still watching now and still caring, that is a huge part of the win.
So tell us in the comments, what felt like a win to you in 2025?
Hit like so more Canadians see this, share it with that friend who's exhausted but still cares, and make sure you're subscribed because 2026 is going to be a test.
And if you want to support independent channels like ours, join the A-Team, subscribe to our Substack, and check out our private Facebook group where you can talk freely in a safe environment. Happy New Year, everybody. Elbows up and Canada forward. Thanks for watching.